If you're unfamiliar with the Iceberg format, it's about organising all the information about a topic from the most widely known facts, the tip of the iceberg, down to the deepest, darkest depths of knowledge. At the tip is all the stuff that most people know about. At the bottom is the nuanced and complicated stuff few people know. This is the Alcoholism Iceberg Explained. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. Tier 1. The tip of the iceberg. Number 1. Binge drinking. Binge drinking is the name we give to one of many styles of heavy drinking, in which large volumes of alcohol are consumed in a very short time period. Binge drinking is defined as a pattern of consumption that brings your blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, up to 0.08% or higher within a 2-hour window. For a male, that typically means consuming 5 or more standard drinks. For a female, it's 4 or more. But government guidelines aside, in the real world, binge drinking often looks like days or sometimes weeks of excessive alcohol consumption punctuated by periods of abstinence. 2. Liver cirrhosis. The human liver is an incredibly resilient organ. It is the only organ capable of completely regenerating itself from only a tiny fraction of healthy tissue. But chronic alcohol abuse pushes it past a point of no return. It begins with fatty liver, where the liver stops its normal metabolic processes to burn off alcohol, causing fat to accumulate. Next comes alcoholic hepatitis, a state of painful inflammation. If the heavy drinking continues past this point, the body attempts to heal or protect itself from this constant damage by building rigid, non-functional scar tissue. That is cirrhosis. Liver cirrhosis is often completely asymptomatic until 70 or 80% of the liver is already destroyed. By the time a patient notices their chronic fatigue and their fluid retention, or a yellowing of their eyes, the liver has already hardened into stone, and the damage is entirely irreversible. 3. Alcoholics Anonymous. In 1935, a failed New York stockbroker named Bill Wilson and an alcoholic surgeon named Dr. Bob Smith came to a simple conclusion. The medical science of their era could not cure alcoholism, but peer-to-peer accountability could really help. Together, they founded Alcoholics Anonymous, introducing the world to the famous 12-step program. The system relies on a progressive series of spiritual and behavioral actions, starting with an admission of powerlessness over alcohol, moving into a searching and fearless moral inventory of oneself, and concluding with making direct amends to those we harmed in active addiction. AA remains contentious today, with as many enemies as advocates, but no one can deny that it completely dismantled the prevailing 20th century view that alcoholism was simply a moral failing or a lack of willpower, shifting public perception towards a progressive, treatable health model that has since saved millions of lives worldwide. 4. Blood alcohol concentration. Blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, is a metric measuring the percentage of your bloodstream that is pure ethanol. A BAC of 0.08%, the legal driving limit across most of the world, means that there are 8 parts of alcohol for every 10,000 parts of blood. Cognitive impairment, however, actually begins at a much lower level. At just 0.02%, your brain's prefrontal cortex experiences a loss of judgment and slight mood changes. by 0.05%, coordination drops and peripheral vision begins to narrow. Crucially, your BAC can continue to aggressively rise for up to 40 minutes after your last drink, as your stomach finishes emptying its contents into your small intestine, turning a confident drive home into a sudden medical and legal catastrophe. 5. Hangovers. A hangover is not just the feeling of malaise and grogginess after drinking. It is a complex combination of acute chemical withdrawal and localized poisoning. When you drink, alcohol blocks the release of a hormone called vasopressin, forcing your kidneys to flush out water at 4 times the normal rate, so you're incredibly dehydrated. But the real suffering comes from the breakdown process. As your liver processes ethanol, it temporarily converts it into acetaldehyde, a highly toxic chemical compound that induces full-body cell damage. Simultaneously, your immune system releases a massive dump of inflammatory proteins called cytokines. This is why a severe hangover feels something more like flu, complete with muscle aches, nausea, and cognitive fog. 6. Blacking out versus passing out. There is a dangerous social misunderstanding between blacking out and passing out. Passing out is a state of unconsciousness. The brain sedates itself to the point of a temporary coma-adjacent sleep. A blackout, however, is far more insidious. During a blackout, you remain awake, walking, talking, ordering food, and holding complex conversations. However, a rapid spike in BAC chemically paralyzes your hippocampus, that's your brain's internal hard drive. The brain remains capable of maintaining short-term processing for about 90 seconds, but it completely loses the ability to write those experiences into long-term memory. This creates on-block blackouts, where entire hours of a person's life are permanently erased from existence, leaving you a complete stranger to your own actions the night before. 7. Social drinking versus alcoholism. Where is the definitive line between a heavy social drinker and a real alcoholic? Well, it doesn't actually come down to the volume of alcohol consumed, or the frequency of your visits to the bar, for example. It comes down to your individual relationship with alcohol. A social drinker uses alcohol as a mild accompaniment to an experience, and they can generally easily decide to stop after 1 or 2 drinks if they need to. For an alcoholic, however, the very first drink triggers a profound neurological change. Once ethanol enters their system, their ability to reliably predict or control their behavior vanishes. You may intend to have only a single beer after work, but that chemical switch has been flipped immediately, forcing you to drink until the bar closes or your money runs out or you pass out. Continuing this cycle despite clear, repetitive damage to your relationships, your career, and your health. In other words, it is possible to be an alcoholic without being a heavy drinker, and vice versa. Number 8. Alcohol is a depressant. If alcohol is classified as a central nervous system depressant, then why does the atmosphere of a crowded bar or a club at midnight feel so highly energetic and euphoric? Why do we tend to think of alcohol as a stimulant? The answer lies in the specific order in which alcohol shuts down the human brain. Alcohol targets the prefrontal cortex first, that's the seat of executive function, impulse control, social anxiety, and emotional boundaries. By silencing your internal worries and social filters, it creates a temporary illusion of stimulation and energy. But as your consumption continues, The chemical sedation inevitably spreads deeper into the motor cortex, the limbic system, and eventually even the brainstem, progressively slowing down your speech, your coordination, your heart rate, your baseline respiration, and eventually making you pass out. Number 9. The beer belly. The classic beer belly is a staple cultural trope, but it isn't just a result of consuming empty calories. It's actually caused by the metabolic hijacking of your liver. Alcohol is incredibly calorie dense, containing 7 calories per gram, nearly as much as pure fat. More importantly, when alcohol enters the body, the liver recognizes it as an acute lethal toxin that must be eliminated immediately. To do this, the liver completely stops lipid oxidation, which is your body's natural fat-burning process. Every single calorie from the food you eat while drinking, alongside the residual sugars from the alcohol itself, is immediately blocked from being used as fuel. Instead, the body routes it straight into fat storage, accumulating primarily as visceral fat wrapped directly around your internal abdominal organs, and the older you get, the harder it is to lose. 10. The designated driver. The concept of the designated driver feels like an ancient or natural part of social culture, doesn't it? But it didn't evolve organically. It's actually the result of a highly calculated and brilliantly executed behavioral engineering campaign in the late 1980s. Introduced by the Harvard School of Public Health, the campaign bypassed traditional preachy public service announcements. Instead, they partnered directly with Hollywood executives and television writers, convincing them to casually insert the phrase designated driver into the script of massive primetime TV shows like Cheers, LA Law, and The Cosby Show. By weaving the concept into the lives of beloved fictional characters, they completely revolutionized global social behavior, transforming the non-drinking peer from a social outcast into a position of responsibility and even respect. Genius. 11. Proof. Why do we still use a convoluted system like proof on liquor bottles when standard alcohol by volume or ABV percentages are perfectly understandable? Well, to understand this, we have to look back to 16th century England. Spirits were taxed based on their alcohol content, but spirits could easily be watered down by dishonest merchants. To combat this, British soldiers developed a rudimentary chemical test. They would douse a small pile of gunpowder in the liquor and attempt to ignite it. If the alcohol content was high enough, specifically above 57.1% ABV, the gunpowder would still explode, and this was proof that the liquor was unadulterated. I didn't know any of that before I started writing this script, and that is interesting as hell to me. 12. Alcohol poisoning signs. When someone drinks far too much and collapses onto a couch, the common social response is often to just let them sleep it off. This can be a fatal mistake. When blood alcohol concentration climbs to critical levels, ethanol begins to systematically paralyze the medulla oblongata, the primitive region of the brainstem that controls your involuntary survival functions. This is acute alcohol poisoning, and you need to know the clinical signs. Respiration dropping below 8 breaths per minute, hypothermia, pale or blue-tinged skin caused by a lack of oxygen, and even continuous vomiting even while completely unconscious. If left unattended, the individual's gag reflex fails entirely, leading to immediate death via aspiration. Sleeping it off is not recovery. It is often a slow descent into a fatal respiratory coma. And that's the tip of the iceberg. Before we move on to deeper understandings of alcoholism, if you've watched this far and you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe. And if you want more personal, behind-the-scenes stuff, head over to the Bat Country community at patreon.com/batcountrysober. Tier 2. The Shallow Waters. 13. High-functioning alcoholics. The cultural stereotype of an alcoholic is highly specific. Someone living under a bridge, holding a brown paper bag, having lost everything. This stereotype is incredibly dangerous because it allows millions of people just like you to look at your own lives and remain in deep denial about your own drinking. High-functioning alcoholics are corporate executives and pilots and renowned surgeons, loving parents, elite athletes. They use their external success as a psychological shield, convincing themselves that because they maintain a high income and a beautiful home, they cannot possibly be alcoholics. But functional alcoholism is not a permanent diagnosis. It is simply a phase. Given enough time, the progressive nature of neurological dependency always strips away the functionality, leaving the underlying illness fully exposed. The active part of the phrase functioning alcoholic is alcoholic, not functioning. 14. GABA and glutamate. To understand the powerful grip of alcoholism, you have to look at the delicate chemical seesaw of the human brain, which is controlled primarily by two neurotransmitters, GABA and glutamate. GABA acts as the brain's primary brake pedal, slowing down neural activity to induce calm and relaxation. Glutamate, on the other hand, is the accelerator, exciting brain cells to keep you alert and focused. Alcohol enters this system as a powerful double threat. It is a GABA agonist, meaning it aggressively hits your brain's brakes, and it is a glutamate antagonist, meaning it completely blocks the accelerator. This dual action creates the initial, deeply seductive state of intoxication, a brain entirely artificially silenced from stress, worry, and physical tension. 15. The kindling effect. The kindling effect is one of the most frightening realities of addiction biology, and it explains why long-term recovery becomes progressively harder every time you relapse. When a severe alcoholic repeatedly goes through the cycle of getting sober and then relapsing, their brain is violently swung back and forth between extreme chemical sedation and hyperexcited withdrawal. Over time, this constant trauma alters the sensitivity of the brain's neural networks. The brain becomes highly sensitized to the withdrawal process. Eventually, a person who used to only experience a mild headache after a weekend bender can actually trigger full-blown, life-threatening grand mal seizures after a single night of drinking, as the brain's electrical system completely short-circuits. 16. Acetaldehyde. We mentioned this a moment ago in the discussion of hangovers, but it deserves its own entry. When you take a drink, your body cannot immediately eliminate the ethanol. First, an enzyme in your liver called alcohol dehydrogenase must break it down. But the immediate byproduct of this reaction is not harmless. It is a chemical compound called acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a highly volatile toxic mutagen and a known Class 1 carcinogen, estimated to be up to 30 times more toxic to human tissue than pure alcohol itself. It actively attacks cellular walls, causes permanent DNA cross-linking, and is the direct culprit behind the facial flushing, rapid heart rate, and internal organ damage associated with drinking. The body works desperately to convert this poison into harmless acetate, but heavy consumption creates a toxic backlog, leaving this destructive chemical to saturate your vital organs for hours. 17. Cunning, baffling, powerful. In the literature of recovery, alcoholism is famously described as being cunning, baffling, and powerful. This isn't just poetic phrasing, it perfectly captures a unique neurological anomaly. Unlike almost any other chronic illness, alcoholism is a condition that actively convinces the patient that they do not have it. If a person develops diabetes or a broken leg, their physical symptoms demand standard medical treatment. But because alcoholism directly hijacks your brain's survival, reward, and reasoning centers, it distorts your perception. It forces you to look at your worsening health, your ruined relationships, and your financial collapse, and blame absolutely anything else, protecting the bottle at all costs. 18. Alcoholic myopathy. Chronic alcoholism doesn't just damage the internal organs, it can cause your skeletal muscles to physically waste away from the inside out. Known as alcoholic myopathy, this condition occurs because ethanol and its toxic byproduct acetaldehyde act as a direct cellular poison to muscle tissue. It severely interferes with protein synthesis, specifically targeting your fast-twitch muscle fibers, the ones responsible for explosive movement and strength. Combined with the severe nutritional deficiencies common in heavy drinkers, the body begins to systematically break down its own muscle mass. Patients experience severe, agonizing nighttime cramping and a profound weakness in their shoulders and hips, often making the simple act of standing up from a chair an immense physical struggle. 19. The pink cloud. When a person finally breaks free from the physical grip of alcohol and navigates the first few weeks of detox and early sobriety, they often experience a psychological phenomenon known as the pink cloud. The brain clears out months or years of constant chemical sedation. It experiences a massive natural rebound of dopamine and endorphins. The recovering alcoholic suddenly feels an intense, almost manic rush of euphoria, supreme optimism, and boundless energy. They become convinced that sobriety is easy and that they were completely cured. But the pink cloud is highly dangerous. It acts as an emotional mask when real-life stress inevitably returns and this artificial chemical high pops. The sudden emotional drop can catch out the individual completely defenseless, leading to a massive risk of relapse. 20. Alcohol-induced depressive disorder. Many people reach for a drink to cope with the feelings of deep sadness, anxiety, or depression, unaware that they are trapped in an unfair neurological paradox. Alcohol provides a temporary escape by artificially flooding the brain with dopamine and serotonin. In response to this artificial overload, the brain attempts to maintain balance by down-regulating its natural production and aggressively stripping away its own dopamine receptors. When the alcohol wears off, the brain is left in a profound artificial neurochemical deficit. The crushing depression, clinical anxiety, and sense of impending doom that an alcoholic feels the morning after a bender is not just an emotional reaction to their life circumstances, it is a direct physical consequence of the chemical depletion caused by alcohol. 21. Women really do get drunk easier. The differences in the guidelines for what represent healthy drinking is different for males and females. By most metrics, female people are advised to drink 20% less than men. Why? Well, it isn't just mass. Women naturally possess less body water to dilute the alcohol, and lower levels of the stomach enzyme gastric alcohol dehydrogenase. Women require lower volumes of alcohol to get drunk. 22. Cross-tolerance. If an active alcoholic is rushed into emergency surgery, the medical team faces a hidden, life-threatening challenge before the scalpel ever touches the skin. This is due to a neurological concept known as cross-tolerance. Because chronic alcohol consumption forces the brain to constantly desensitize its GABA receptors to survive the daily influx of alcohol, those receptors become highly resistant to any substance that utilizes the same chemical pathways. Medical sedatives, particularly benzodiazepines, and certain general anesthetics, target those exact same GABA networks. As a direct result, a sober alcoholic on the operating table can require up to double or triple the standard medical dose of anesthesia just to be safely knocked unconscious. 23. Alcohol-related dementia. Prolonged toxic exposure can physically shrink the human brain to a horrifying degree, leading to a specific, recognized cognitive decline known as alcohol-related dementia. Neuroimaging of chronic drinkers reveals a massive loss of both grey and white matter, with the heaviest structural damage occurring in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of personality and planning and complex reasoning. Unlike degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, however, alcohol-related dementia possesses a unique silver lining. If the individual can maintain strict long-term sobriety, accompanied by intensive nutritional rehabilitation, the brain can occasionally halt the decline and partially rebuild its cognitive pathways. 24. Enabling and codependency. Alcoholism is rarely an isolated condition. It is a family matter that reshapes the psychology of everyone surrounding the addict. This often manifests as codependency, where a loved one's entire self-worth and emotional stability become completely tied to fixing or managing the alcoholic. This psychology drives the toxic behavior of enabling. Some enablers think they are helping out of pure love, but by calling in sick to work for the alcoholic or paying their overdue rent or cleaning up after them, they act as artificial cushions. By continuously absorbing the painful real-world consequences of the addiction, the enabler inadvertently prevents the alcoholic from ever hitting the rock bottom they might require to force a genuine desire for change. 25. Dry drunk syndrome. Stopping the physical act of drinking is merely the first and arguably the easiest step in addiction recovery. When an alcoholic achieves abstinence but fails to do any of the underlying psychological, emotional, or behavioral inner work, they sometimes enter a state known as dry drunk syndrome. A dry drunk is white-knuckling their sobriety through sheer force of will. Because they haven't addressed the core trauma, anxiety, or coping deficits that drove them to drink in the first place, they retain all of the behavioral traits of active alcoholism, even though they are not actively drinking. They remain incredibly restless and irritable, plagued maybe by explosive anger. They might be deeply resentful and dishonest, proving that physical abstinence without genuine internal transformation is simply a state of sober misery. Tier 3. Below the surface. 26. Delirium tremens. As we cross deeper below the surface of the iceberg now, we encounter something most people have heard of but have no idea what it's like. The terrifying medical reality of delirium tremens, commonly known as the DTs. Beginning roughly 48 to 96 hours after your last drink, delirium tremens represent a complete catastrophic breakdown of the central nervous system. With the brain's chemical brakes entirely removed, glutamate levels surge into an absolute electrical storm. The patient plunges into a state of severe confusion. That's confusion in the medical sense, experiencing terrifying, vivid, tactile, auditory and visual hallucination, most famously formication, the absolute convincing sensation that thousands of insects are crawling directly under your skin. Accompanied by extreme tremors, dangerous spikes in blood pressure and malignant hypothermia, delirium tremens carry a mortality rate of up to 20% if left untreated in an ICU. 27. Medical detox. There is a life or death distinction in the world of substance withdrawal. If you lock a severe heroin or cocaine addict in a room for a week, they will endure an agonizing, painful experience that feels like dying, but biologically, you'll survive. If you do that to a severely physically dependent alcoholic, you're signing their death warrant. Alcohol and benzodiazepines are the only two substance withdrawals that can routinely and abruptly kill a person through the physical shock to their nervous system. Professional, medically supervised detox using tapered sedatives is an absolute non-negotiable requirement. 28. Wet brain. Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, known colloquially as wet brain, is a permanent, heartbreaking neurological point of no return. This condition is not actually caused directly by the toxicity of alcohol itself, but by a severe deficiency of thiamine or vitamin B1. Chronic alcohol abuse aggressively destroys the gut's ability to absorb nutrients while depleting the liver's thiamine stores. The acute phase, Wernicke's encephalopathy, causes sudden mental confusion and severe loss of motor coordination. If doctors do not immediately flood your system with a high dose of thiamine, the condition permanently hardens into Korsakoff's psychosis. The brain loses its physical ability to form any new memories, leaving the patient permanently institutionalized, forever trapped in a looping, vanishing fragment of their past. 29. Holiday heart syndrome. You can be a young, athletic person and possess zero history of cardiovascular disease and still end up in the emergency room with a racing, erratic heartbeat after a heavy weekend bender. First coined by physicians in 1978, this condition is known as holiday heart syndrome. It refers to the sudden onset of acute cardiac arrhythmias, most commonly atrial fibrillation, brought on purely by heavy episodic alcohol consumption. Ethanol and its toxic metabolites act as a direct acute poison to the heart's delicate electrical conduction system, causing the upper chambers of the heart to quiver rapidly and chaotically instead of pumping blood efficiently. This creates a dangerous short-term window for blood clots, stroke, or sudden cardiovascular collapse, although those worst-case scenarios are very rare. 30. Esophageal varices. For individuals suffering from advanced alcoholic liver disease, death can arrive in a matter of mere minutes through an incredibly violent medical event called a ruptured esophageal varix. When the liver becomes heavily cirrhotic and scarred, blood can no longer flow through it freely from the digestive tract. This causes blood to back up into the portal vein system under extreme pressure. To escape, The blood forces its way into the tiny, incredibly delicate capillaries lining the lower esophagus. These vessels swell up into massive, fragile, high-pressure balloons. If the patient swallows rough food, dry coughs, or takes another heavy drink, these vessels can instantly, suddenly rupture, causing a massive, catastrophic internal hemorrhage that is almost impossible to stop outside of an operating table. 31. Pause, or post-acute withdrawal syndrome. When an alcoholic completes their initial 1-week physical detox, they often assume the physical battle is over. They are often completely unprepared, as I was, for pause, or post-acute withdrawal syndrome. While the raw, dangerous toxins leave the body quickly, the brain's neuroreceptor pathways take anywhere from 6 to 24 months to fully recalibrate. Pause is a protracted, cyclical neurological stabilization process characterized by sudden, overwhelming waves of clinical anxiety, profound brain fog, sleep architecture disruption, and emotional numbness. These symptoms arrive out of nowhere, even when the person's life is going perfectly, making it a massive psychological hurdle that frequently, unfortunately, drives recovering alcoholics to relapse out of pure frustration. 32. The Sinclair Method. What if the most effective way to cure alcoholism wasn't forcing a person to stop drinking through willpower, but rather forcing them to drink while taking a specific preventative pill? This is the foundational premise of the Sinclair Method, which utilizes an opioid antagonist medication called naltrexone. Normally, when an alcoholic takes a drink, their brain releases a rush of endorphins that hit opioid receptors, lighting up the reward center and reinforcing the intense craving for the next drink. By taking naltrexone precisely 1 hour before consuming alcohol, these receptors are blocked. The individual still experiences the clumsy cognitive impairment of alcohol, but none of the chemical euphoria. Over several months, a process called pharmacological extinction occurs, systematically erasing the biological craving at its root. This is the Sinclair Method. 33. Acamprosate or Campral. Like the Sinclair Method, this involves medication. But unlike medications designed to make you violently ill if you touch alcohol, or those that block the pleasure of drinking, a medication called acamprosate acts as an artificial chemical stabilizer for a chaotic, newly sober brain. When a chronic alcoholic stops drinking, their brain is left in a state of permanent, low-humming electrical hyper-excitation due to a massive backlog of glutamate. This manifests as a constant, intolerable internal state of restlessness, physical tension, and anxiety. Acamprosate works by directly interacting with both the GABA and glutamate receptors, restoring the natural homeostatic balance of the central nervous system. It essentially acts as a chemical shield, quieting the internal neurological storm that typically drives an individual back to the bottle in early recovery. 34. Dupuytren's contracture. Advanced alcoholism can eventually write its diagnostic signature directly into the palms of your hands through a localized physical deformity known as Dupuytren's contracture. This unusual condition targets the palmar fascia, the thin layer of structural connective tissue lying directly beneath the skin of your palm. Over months of chronic alcohol abuse, this tissue begins to abnormally thicken. As it tightens, it forms hard cords that physically pull your ring finger and pinky downward into a permanent immovable curl towards your palm. While this condition can occur genetically in non-drinkers, its distinct correlation with advanced alcoholic cirrhosis has made it a classic diagnostic sign in clinical medicine for over a century. 35. The alcohol-gut connection. We often focus on the liver and brain, but alcohol wages an incredibly destructive war on your gastrointestinal tract too. Ethanol is a potent disinfectant. When swallowed in high continuous concentrations, it effectively sanitizes your digestive system, wiping out the delicate balance of your gut microbiome. Furthermore, alcohol and its toxic metabolites directly erode the mucosal lining of the stomach and small intestine, systematically breaking down the tight cellular junctions that keep your digestive tract sealed. This leads to a condition known as leaky gut. Toxins, undigested food particles, and harmful bacteria escape directly through the intestinal walls into the bloodstream, forcing the liver into a state of constant defensive, system-wide inflammation. 36. Rhinophyma, or whiskey nose. For centuries, the cultural trope of the whiskey nose, a large, bulbous, deeply purple and bumpy nose, has been used as definitive public proof of chronic alcoholism. In the world of dermatology, however, this condition is known as rhinophyma and is actually a severe subtype of rosacea, a chronic inflammatory skin condition. The link to alcoholism is heavily misunderstood. Drinking alcohol does not cause rhinophyma, but because alcohol is a potent vasodilator that continuously widens blood vessels and floods the face with blood, heavy drinking severely exacerbates and accelerates the underlying inflammation, transforming a latent genetic skin condition into a highly stigmatized physical marker. 37. Anhedonia. One of the most emotionally hollow phases of early sobriety is a psychological state known as anhedonia, the literal physical inability to experience pleasure. When a person abuses alcohol for years, the brain is forced to severely dial down its natural dopamine receptors to protect its delicate neural pathways from constant artificial overstimulation. When the individual suddenly gets sober, their desensitized receptors are left completely numb. The natural world, good food, sex, hobbies, or achievements cannot produce anywhere near enough dopamine to register. The recovering alcoholic is left feeling hollow, as if the world has lost all colour, presenting a massive psychological hurdle where their own brain convinces them that life without alcohol is a permanent emotional wasteland. 38. The alcoholic nosebleed. Frequent, prolonged, and remarkably heavy nosebleeds are an understated but highly common warning sign of escalating chronic alcohol dependence. This occurs to a dangerous three-part physiological intersection. First, alcohol acts as a powerful anticoagulant, thinning the blood and reducing the ability of blood platelets to clump together and form clots. Second, drinking triggers acute spikes in systemic blood pressure. Finally, ethanol degrades the structural integrity of the delicate capillaries lining the nasal septum. When one of these weakened blood vessels pops under high pressure, the thinned, unclottable blood flows freely, turning a minor annoyance into a prolonged, potential medical emergency. 39. Alcoholic ketoacidosis. Alcohol ketoacidosis, or AKA, is a severe, life-threatening metabolic crisis that occurs when a chronic alcoholic goes on an intensive, multi-day binge in which they stop consuming food entirely. As the individual drinks heavily and vomits repeatedly, the liver's vital stores of glycogen are completely depleted, plunging the body into a state of acute starvation. Desperate for energy, the body enters a state of metabolic panic, rapidly breaking down its own fat stores into fatty acids. the liver converts these fatty acids into ketones at an uncontrollable rate. As these ketones accumulate, they turn the entire bloodstream highly acidic, leading to a rapid organ failure, altered consciousness, and death, if not immediately corrected with IV fluids and glucose. Tier 4. The depths. 40. Confabulation. As we cross into the deeper zones of the iceberg, the psychological realities become deeply unsettling. In late-stage Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, patients suffer from a phenomenon called confabulation. Because their short-term memory is physically broken, they cannot remember what happened even 30 seconds ago. But if you ask them what they did yesterday, they do not lie, nor do they admit they don't know. Instead, their subconscious mind automatically invents a strangely detailed, completely fabricated story out of thin air to fill the terrifying cognitive void. A patient who has been confined to a hospital bed for months will confidently tell you about a beautiful walk they took in the park that morning, completely believing the fiction to be real. 41. The giggle effect, or pseudobulbar affect. Prolonged exposure to alcohol can eventually damage the delicate deep brain white matter pathways that connect the evolutionary cerebral cortex to the cerebellum and brainstem. This structural damage can result in a highly disruptive condition known as the pseudobulbar affect, or what recovery circles sometimes call the giggle effect. It is characterized by sudden, involuntary, and entirely uncontrollable outbursts of laughing or crying. A person might burst into booming, hysterical laughter during a somber funeral service, or dissolve into deep, hyperventilating tears over a perfectly mundane or cheerful comment. These outbursts are entirely disconnected from the person's actual internal emotions, trapping them in an embarrassing display of physical dysregulation. 42. Stash spots. The behavioral patterns of an active alcoholic are shaped by an underlying fear of being cut off from their chemical lifeline. This drives the creation of highly sophisticated, compulsive spatial mapping for hiding alcohol within their environment. The selection of stash spots becomes an obsessive tactical discipline. Bottles are rarely left in obvious places. Instead, they are taped behind large appliances, hidden inside toilet tanks, buried inside hollowed-out books, or inside plant pots or empty paint cans. The alcoholic maintains a continuous, anxious mental inventory of fluid levels across all active locations, experiencing panic if any spot is disturbed or discovered by a loved one. 43. Alcoholic pancreatitis. Alcoholic pancreatitis is an excruciatingly painful medical emergency where your digestive tract turns inward and begins to literally eat itself alive. Normally, your pancreas manufactures powerful digestive enzymes and ships them in an inactive state down to the small intestine to break down your food. However, high concentrations of alcohol alter the permeability of the pancreatic ducts and cause the fluid to become thick and static. This traps the enzymes, causing them to activate prematurely inside the pancreas itself. The organ begins auto-digesting its own living tissue, leading to massive internal necrosis, widespread inflammation, and an agonizing, piercing pain that radiates straight through the abdomen to the spine. 44. Gout. Historically known as the disease of kings, Gout is a prevalent, excruciatingly painful reality for modern chronic alcoholics. Your kidneys are responsible for filtering out and excreting uric acid from your blood. However, when alcohol is present in your system, the kidneys prioritize processing and clearing ethanol metabolites first, leaving uric acid to accumulate in the bloodstream. Eventually, this excess uric acid precipitates out of the blood, settling into the peripheral joints, most commonly the joint of the big toe. The acid crystallizes into thousands of microscopic needle-sharp shards. The resulting immune response triggers an inflammation so intense that even the slight movement of air or the touch of a light bedsheet causes agonizing screams of pain. 45. The geographic cure. The geographic cure is one of the most common psychological delusions encountered in the world of addiction recovery. Trapped in the misery of active alcoholism, your mind externalizes the problem. You blame your environment, your current city, your high-stress job, your overbearing family for your drinking habits. Convinced a fresh start will solve everything, you pack your bags and relocate across the country or to a new continent. But once the initial novelty of the new environment wears off, you discover a painful truth. You packed the exact same brain, the same trauma, and the same chemical dependency, proving the timeless recovery adage, wherever you go, there you are. 46. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Alcohol disrupts the normal structural development of an embryo. When a pregnant woman drinks, ethanol passes freely across the placental barrier. Because a developing fetus does not possess a fully formed liver, it cannot process the toxin, leaving the alcohol to pool in the amniotic fluid and directly disrupt neural crest cell migration. This can cause fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. The condition leaves the child with permanent, lifelong executive functioning deficits and distinct craniofacial deformities, making alcohol the single leading preventable cause of congenital birth defects and neurodevelopmental disabilities in the modern world. 47. Tapering. When access to a professional medical detox facility is impossible due to financial or geographical barriers, the act of drinking undergoes a dystopian transformation. It ceases to be about pursuit of a buzz or an emotional escape, and instead becomes a strict, mathematically precise, life-saving medication schedule known as tapering. To avoid fatal withdrawal seizures, the individual must slowly reduce their alcohol intake over several days. This requires incredible clinical discipline, consuming precisely measured beverages like light beer at fixed rigid intervals throughout the day and night, solely to keep their central nervous system from crashing into a hyperexcited shock state entirely devoid of any pleasure. Tapering has a bad reputation amongst long-term sober people. Many see tapering as an excuse to continue drinking. 48. Antabuse. Approved by the FDA in 1951, disulfiram, commonly known as Antabuse, is a medication designed to leverage intense psychological terror to enforce physical sobriety. When a person takes Antabuse, it blocks the aldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme in the liver. Under normal circumstances, this enzyme quickly breaks down toxic acetaldehyde into harmless acetate. If a person drinks even a fraction of a shot of alcohol while on this medication, acetaldehyde instantly spikes to highly toxic levels within minutes. The result is an immediate, violent physical punishment, projectile vomiting, blinding headaches, extreme chest pain, and severe tachycardia, transforming the chemistry of alcohol into a direct physical weapon against the user. 49. The alcohol monopoly. In several of the wealthiest, most socially progressive regions on Earth, the free market sale of alcohol is entirely illegal. Countries like Sweden and Norway, and various states and Canadian provinces utilise a strict government alcohol monopoly. In these regions, private liquor stores are completely banned. If you want to buy a beverage with an ABV above a low threshold, you must purchase it from a heavily regulated government-owned store. There are zero sales, no discounts, no bulk buy incentives, strict operating hours and mandatory ID checks for everyone, deliberately utilising systemic consumer friction as a public health barrier to curb national rates of alcoholism. 50. Auto-brewery syndrome. Imagine being pulled over by the police, blowing a deadly level on a breathalyzer, and being arrested for a DUI despite not having touched a single drop of alcohol in years. This is the reality of auto-brewery syndrome, or ABS, a rare medical condition where the human gastrointestinal tract becomes heavily colonized by fungal yeast strains. When the individual consumes a high carbohydrate meal like a bowl of pasta, a slice of pizza or a piece of fruit, the yeast inside their gut ferments those sugars directly into pure ethanol. The alcohol is absorbed straight through the intestinal walls and into the bloodstream, making the person profoundly intoxicated purely from eating normal food. 51. Sobriety fatigue. One of the most insidious reasons people relapse in the first few months of recovery is a profound, exhausting state known as sobriety fatigue. In active addiction, drinking is an automated subconscious reflex to any emotional or physical stimulus. In early sobriety, however, that automation is gone. Every single moment requires conscious, intensive cognitive processing. Saying no to a craving, navigating a social gathering, managing raw emotional spikes, and passing by the liquor store burns an immense amount of glucose within the prefrontal cortex. The brain is working overtime to structurally rewire its neural pathways, leaving the recovering individual feeling completely, physically and mentally shattered at the end of the day. 52. The warm blanket illusion. The timeless cultural image of a stranded explorer drinking a shot of brandy from a St. Bernard's collar to stay alive in a blizzard is actually a recipe for a rapid medical disaster. Alcohol triggers rapid cutaneous vasodilation, forcing the blood vessels directly beneath your skin to open wide. This causes warm blood to rapidly rush away from your vital internal organs out to your extremities, creating a deceptive, deeply comforting sensory illusion of warmth, the warm blanket effect. In reality, this surface blood cools down aggressively against the freezing external air, quickly lowering your actual core body temperature and shutting off your body's natural shivering defense mechanism, severely accelerating hypothermia. 53. Alcoholic neuropathy. Chronic alcohol abuse can eventually cause your lower extremities to feel as though they are permanently walking across a bed of burning hot coals. Known as alcoholic neuropathy, this condition is caused by the direct neurotoxic destruction of peripheral nerves by alcohol, heavily exacerbated by the profound nutritional deficiencies of active addiction. It presents as constant numbness, agonizing pins and needles, and burning sensations in the feet, eventually leading to a complete loss of balance, muscle weakness, and unhealed gait wounds. Tier 5. The Abyssal Zone. 54. The US government poisoned alcohol. As we plunge into the abyssal zone of the iceberg, we uncover dark historical secrets. During Prohibition, the deadliest weapon deployed against illicit drinkers wasn't organised crime syndicates, it was actually the United States federal government. Frustrated that bootleggers were routinely stealing industrial-use alcohol and redistributing it for human consumption, the government ordered industrial factories to heavily increase the denaturing process by adding lethal chemicals into the mixtures, including methanol, benzene, and zinc. Bootleggers stole and mixed the alcohol anyway. By the time Prohibition came to an end, an estimated 10,000 American citizens had been killed by drinking government-poisoned alcohol. 55. Asymptomatic high blood alcohol content. A normal, non-tolerant human being will slide into a deep, fatal respiratory coma when their blood alcohol concentration reaches roughly 0.4% or above. However, the human brain possesses an unbelievable capacity for cellular neuroadaptation. In severe, long-term alcoholics, the brain downregulates its receptors so deeply that it requires a massive, otherwise lethal baseline level of alcohol just to function normally. There are numerous documented medical cases of chronic alcoholics being admitted to emergency departments fully conscious, walking, holding coherent conversations and filling out medical paperwork with measured BAC levels over 0.5%. Blood saturation levels that would readily cause immediate death in a normal person. 56. Alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Chronic high-dose exposure to alcohol and its highly toxic metabolite, acetaldehyde, exerts a slow, direct chemical destruction on myocytes, the individual muscle cells of the human heart. Over years of heavy drinking, this toxicity disrupts the delicate structure of the heart, preventing it from contracting efficiently. Known as alcoholic cardiomyopathy, the heart muscle begins to physically stretch out, balloon, and sag like an overused rubber band. The heart chambers dilate, drastically reducing the organ's ability to pump blood to the rest of the body, leading straight to congestive heart failure and permanent cardiovascular disability. 57. Beer potomania syndrome. A chronic alcoholic can easily trigger a rapid, life-threatening, brain-swelling emergency purely by drinking massive quantities of beer while neglecting solid food. This condition is known clinically as beer potomania. When an individual consumes large quantities of beer without eating solid food, the kidneys lose their baseline ability to excrete free water due to a lack of dietary solutes. This triggers a rapid state of severe hyponatremia, meaning blood sodium levels drop to dangerous lows. Water rushes out of the blood into brain cells via osmosis, causing them to swell up inside the skull, leading to sudden seizures, coma, and death. 58. Congeners. Have you ever wondered why cheap, dark liquors cause hangovers that feel like a near-death experience, while high-end, clear vodka produces a much milder morning after effect? The answer comes down to congeners. Congeners are complex chemical byproducts produced during the fermentation and aging process. They include volatile trace compounds like acetone, tannins, and fusel oils. Dark liquors like whiskey, brandy, and red wine contain exceptionally high concentration of congeners compared to clear liquors. When you consume them, your liver is forced to process and break down these varied, complex chemical toxins simultaneously, massively extending the period of cellular poisoning and multiplying hangover severity. 59. Ethanol as an antidote. How about this for a twist of medical irony? If a person swallows a lethal dose of commercial antifreeze, the immediate first-line emergency room antidote is actually an IV drip of pure medical-grade alcohol. Antifreeze contains methanol or ethylene glycol, which the liver converts into highly destructive compounds like formic acid, causing permanent blindness and kidney failure. However, the liver enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase possesses a massive chemical preference for ethanol. By flooding the patient's bloodstream with pure alcohol, the enzyme completely ignores the deadly antifreeze toxins, allowing the raw poison to pass safely out of the body through the urine without being processed. 60. The gin craze. In the early 18th century, London was on the cusp of a societal collapse due to the unchecked rise of cheap liquor, an era known as the gin craze. To combat French brandy imports, the English government permitted unlicensed, untaxed domestic gin production. Gin quickly became cheaper than beer or even clean water. The city was flooded with thousands of illegal dram shops producing toxic, unregulated spirits, often laced with turpentine and sulfuric acid. Infant mortality in London skyrocketed to over 70%, productivity plummeted, and widespread addiction tore the social fabric of the city apart, coining the dark historical term Mother's Ruin, and forcing Parliament to intervene with aggressive legislation to restore basic civilization. 61. Meos pathway. Normally, the liver breaks down alcohol using a standard enzyme pathway called alcohol dehydrogenase, as we've covered repeatedly. But when a person transitions into a chronic, heavy, daily drinking alcoholic, that primary pathway becomes completely overwhelmed. To survive, the body activates a hidden emergency backup engine, the microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, or the Meos pathway. While the Meos pathway allows the body to clear alcohol at an accelerated rate, it comes with a terrible catch. It generates a massive backlog of destructive cellular free radicals and completely alters how the liver processes common medications, turning standard doses of drugs like acetaminophen into highly toxic substances that can trigger sudden liver failure. 62. Alcohol and REM sleep suppression. Passing out drunk is often mistaken for a deep, restful night of sleep, but neurologically, your brain is actually enduring a night of severe sensory deprivation. Alcohol is a potent inhibitor of REM, or rapid eye movement, which is the vital sleep state responsible for emotional processing, memory consolidation, and dreaming. It traps your brain architecture in light, fragmented, unrestorative sleep. When a chronic alcoholic finally enters sobriety, their brain experiences a violent neurological rebound known as REM rebound. The brain attempts to rapidly catch up on years of lost dream cycles, resulting in incredibly vivid, terrifyingly lifelike nightmares and intense night sweats that plague recovering individuals in early sobriety. 63. Spontaneous human combustion. During the height of the 19th century temperance and anti-alcohol movements, pseudo-scientific pamphlets and religious groups utilised a terrifying scare tactic to discourage public drinking: the myth of spontaneous human combustion. Advocates claimed that an alcoholic's internal organs and muscle tissues could become so thoroughly saturated with flammable ethanol that proximity to a candle flame, or even a sudden internal metabolic spark, would cause their body to burst into uncontrollable flames from within. This bizarre medical myth was so deeply ingrained in the cultural psyche of the era that Charles Dickens famously used it to kill off the heavy drinking character Crook in his 1853 novel Bleak House. 64. The Bill Wilson Belladonna Cure. The profound spiritual foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous was actually achieved during a state of intense drug-induced medical delirium. In 1934, AA co-founder Bill Wilson checked into Towns Hospital in New York to treat his terminal alcoholism. His treatment consisted of the famous Belladonna Cure, a highly aggressive chemical protocol involving regular doses of Atropa belladonna and Hyoscyamus niger. These are potent, toxic, and anticholinergic hallucinogens. During this intense medical delirium, Wilson experienced a blinding flash of white light and felt a profound cosmic sense of divine presence. This hallucinatory experience directly formed the spiritual cornerstone of the 12 steps and the concept of a higher power. 65. Alcoholic Feta. Advanced late-stage alcoholics possess a highly distinct, sweet, musty and pungent body odour that smells like a mixture of rotting fruit and chemical waste. This is not the smell of spilled liquor on their clothing. It is a clinical condition known as feta hepaticus, or alcoholic feta. It occurs when a heavily cirrhotic, failing liver loses its ability to filter out volatile sulfur compounds, specifically dimethyl sulfide. Because these toxins can no longer be processed by the liver, they back up into the bloodstream and are forced out of the body through the lungs and sweat glands, acting as a direct clinical sign of portal hypertension and advanced liver failure. 67. Resentment. In addiction psychology and recovery groups, the single deadliest trigger for a physical relapse is not access to a bar, or financial stress, or even physical pain. It is holding a grudge. Alcoholics Anonymous literature explicitly states that resentment is the number one offender that destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Psychologically, holding a resentment involves continuously reliving an old injury or emotional wound over and over. This mental loop triggers a continuous influx of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. The addict's brain, naturally deficient in coping mechanisms, eventually seeks out immediate chemical relief from this self-induced emotional distress, driving them straight back to a relapse. Resentment is the number one sobriety killer. Tier 6. The Mariana Trench. 68. The Markia-Fava-Bignami disease. Now we have reached the Mariana Trench of the iceberg, the deepest, most obscure, and medically bizarre realities of alcoholism. First on this part of the list is the Markia-Fava-Bignami disease, a rare, devastating neurological complication of chronic alcoholism. This disease involves the progressive demyelination and localized necrosis of the corpus callosum, the massive bridge of white matter nerve fibers that allows the left and right hemispheres of your brain to communicate. Historically tied to heavy drinkers of cheap homemade red wines, this neurotoxic decay causes a rapid onset of severe paranoia, structural split brain syndrome, emotional volatility, loss of motor control, seizures, and a descent into a fatal coma. 69. Nice. Thick, or tetrahydropapaverylene. In the 1970s, a highly controversial chemical theory emerged that attempted to explain the raw physical obsession of alcoholism, suggesting that alcoholics' brains convert ethanol into a substance structurally identical to heroin. Researcher Virginia Davis proposed that when an alcoholic processes acetaldehyde, a unique metabolic anomaly causes it to fuse with dopamine in the brain, creating a complex compound called THIQ. THIQ. THIQ is the exact chemical intermediary stage utilized by the poppy plant to manufacture morphine. The theory suggested that alcoholics are biologically driven to drink because their brains are secretly manufacturing opiates from ethanol, though modern neuroscience now views this theory with deep skepticism. 70. Central pontine myelinolysis. A malnourished alcoholic with severe electrolyte imbalances enters an emergency room. A well-meaning doctor can accidentally freeze them inside their own body through a medical catastrophe called central pontine myelinolysis. Chronic alcoholics regularly have dangerously low blood sodium levels. If the medical team administers aggressive IV saline too rapidly to fix this, the sudden, violent osmotic fluid shift tears the protective myelin sheaths off the vital nerve fibers inside the pons region of the brainstem. This triggers locked-in syndrome. The patient becomes completely paralyzed from head to toe. 71. The drunkard's cloak. In 17th century England and early American colonies, public drunkenness was met with a brutal, humiliating form of corporal shaming known as the drunkard's cloak. Instead of a fine or a night in a jail cell, a chronic offender was forced to wear a torturous wooden apparatus. A large, heavy wooden beer barrel had its bottom knocked out, with holes precisely cut into the top and sides for the individual's head and arms. The alcoholic was locked inside this heavy barrel and marched through the crowded town street by guards, subjected to public ridicule, flying garbage, and physical exhaustion, serving as a living billboard for the consequences of public intoxication. 72. The dry saliva phenomenon. Decades into strict, unbroken sobriety, a recovering alcoholic can step into a specific environment and experience a sudden, visceral, phantom taste of liquor out of nowhere. This is known as the dry saliva phenomenon. It is a deeply rooted neurosomatic Pavlovian response. When a sober individual encounters an intense environmental anchor, such as a specific barroom temperature, lighting combination, or acute emotional state, their subconscious instantly anticipates the arrival of alcohol even if they've been sober for years. The salivary glands immediately alter their fluid production, creating a thick, sticky, dry sensation in the mouth, or a metallic phantom taste of their old drink of choice, triggering an immediate psychological craving. 73. Ziever's syndrome. Ziever's syndrome is a rare, life-threatening metabolic breakdown that represents a near-total collapse of an alcoholic's blood and organ stability. Occurring after severe, prolonged, and continuous alcohol binges, the syndrome is defined by a distinct clinical triad: hemolytic anemia, where the body's own immune system begins rapidly rupturing and destroying its own red blood cells; hyperlipidemia, an extreme dangerous surge of fats and cholesterol in the blood; and severe jaundice caused by acute hepatic necrosis. It represents a catastrophic systemic failure of both the liver and the bone marrow, and carries an exceptionally high mortality rate if misdiagnosed as standard liver failure in emergency departments. 74. Subluxation of the C1 vertebra. Severe alcoholics frequently walk around with a partially dislocated neck without having any conscious memory of an accident or injury. This occurs due to a hidden anatomical vulnerability. Prolonged alcohol exposure induces systemic muscle wasting and reduces deep skeletal muscle tone. During a blacked out fall, a heavy stumble, or even a violent bout of morning vomiting, the complete lack of muscle support allows the atlas, the C1 vertebra at the very top of the spine, to slightly slip out of alignment with the base of the skull. Because their pain receptors are continuously dulled by daily drinking, the injury goes entirely unnoticed, leading to chronic neurological deficits. 75. Genetic mutation. Most of us know that alcohol increases cancer risk, but modern oncological genetics have uncovered a terrifyingly direct pathway. Alcohol actively turns on the specific master gene responsible for rapid tumor growth. Acetaldehyde directly alters the methylation patterns of the MYC oncogene, which acts as the primary master regulator of cellular life cycle and proliferation. When mutated and unsilenced by alcohol, this gene permanently turns on, giving cells a continuous instruction to replicate uncontrollably. This explains why alcohol acts as a direct, causal carcinogenic agent for highly aggressive cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, and colon, completely independent of the user's other lifestyle habits. 76. Bill Wilson again, this time with LSD. In the 1950s, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, became a strong vocal advocate for utilizing a powerful psychedelic drug to help chronic alcoholics achieve long-term sobriety. Under medical supervision, Wilson himself participated in clinical experiments with LSD. He discovered that the profound psychedelic experience safely replicated the exact state of ego dissolution and intense spiritual awakening that he had felt during his belladonna cure in 1934, except this time devoid of any physical addiction. Wilson wanted to integrate structured LSD therapy directly into the AA program, but the conservative board of directors forced him to completely step back from this stance to protect the organization's public reputation. 77. Feminization of male alcoholics. Advanced alcoholic liver failure can eventually trigger a visible hormonal inversion in biological men, a process known as feminization. The liver is responsible for breaking down circulating hormones including estrogen. When the liver is destroyed by cirrhosis, this metabolic clearing pathway fails entirely, causing estrogen levels to skyrocket. Simultaneously, alcohol acts as a direct gonadotoxin, actively suppressing testosterone production within the Leydig cells of the testes. This extreme hormonal imbalance causes male alcoholics to sometimes develop gynecomastia, the growth of female breast tissue, alongside testicular atrophy, a complete loss of body hair, and a redistribution of fat to a female pattern. 78. Alcohol-induced porphyria cutanea tarda. Alcohol can trigger a rare, agonizing metabolic skin disorder that transforms a chronic drinker into a classic, folkloric vampire. Known as porphyria cutanea tarda, alcohol disrupts the hepatic synthesis of heme, causing a dangerous accumulation of iron and porphyrins in the liver and skin. Porphyrins are highly photoreactive chemicals. When the patient steps out into normal daylight, the UV rays react violently with the porphyrins in their skin cells. The result is immediate, severe blistering, extreme skin fragility, scarring, and deep hyperpigmentation on the face and hands, even from minor sun exposure, forcing the individual to live an entirely nocturnal existence. 79. The whiskey chills. A severely dependent alcoholic in the depths of active addiction can sit in a room that is 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of summer and still shake with violent, freezing chills. This condition is known as the whiskey chills. High-dose, continuous alcohol consumption permanently damages the warm sensitive neurons located inside the hypothalamus, the brain's internal thermostat. When their blood alcohol concentration begins to drop in the morning, the damaged hypothalamus completely misinterprets the bodily data. It signals the body that it is entering a state of fatal hypothermia, triggering violent vasoconstriction, goosebumps, and severe muscle shivering despite perfectly warm external temperatures. 80. The tipple law. In medieval Europe, public intoxication was viewed as an existential threat to the economic output and stability of small towns. To combat this, several municipalities enacted the tipple law. This historical ordinance required any citizen consuming spirits or strong ale within their private home to keep their street-facing window shutters completely open at all times. This permitted the town watchman, local clergy, or passing community members to directly audit their level of sobriety through the open window. It leveraged total public exposure and community shaming as a primitive regulatory tool to prevent domestic alcoholism. 81. Sclerosing hyaline necrosis. When a liver biopsy is performed on a patient suffering from severe alcoholic hepatitis, pathologists look for a distinct microscopic death pattern known as sclerosing hyaline necrosis. When liver cells are systematically killed by the acute toxicity of alcohol, they leave behind dense, tangled clumps of damaged proteins known as Mallory-Denk bodies. As the body attempts to clear these dead cells, a unique web-like hardening and scarring forms around the central veins of the liver lobules. This specific microscopic pattern resembles a tightening spiderweb, revealing a process of localized cellular suffocation that is entirely unique to alcohol-induced liver destruction. 82. Spontaneous sobriety or natural recovery. One of the most fascinating but rarely discussed phenomena in addiction medicine is spontaneous sobriety or natural recovery. The dominant medical dogma states that a severe long-term alcoholic can only achieve sobriety through intensive clinical intervention or rehab or lifelong participation in 12-step groups or medication. However, numerous long-term epidemiological studies have revealed a significant subpopulation of severe alcoholics who simply wake up one day, decide to stop drinking and never touch alcohol again for the rest of their lives without any therapy or group support. This phenomenon typically follows a profound cognitive shift or identity re-evaluation, completely challenging our understanding of addiction biology. 83. Blind drunk. The phrase blind drunk has a horrifyingly literal origin rooted in the production of illegal backyard moonshine. During the amateur distillation of alcohol, the very first liquid to boil off the still is known as the foreshots. This early potion contains high concentrations of methanol. Inexperienced or greedy distillers often fail to discard this fraction. When consumed, the liver processes methanol into formaldehyde and then into formic acid. Formic acid directly targets and destroys the highly sensitive, energy-dependent cells of the optic nerve. A single glass of bad moonshine can cause complete, permanent demyelination of the optic tract, plunging the drinker into lifelong blindness within hours. 84. Gouty tophus. In individuals suffering from advanced untreated alcoholic gout, the accumulation of uric acid can eventually manifest as a disturbing physical deformity known as the gouty tophus. When the body is continuously saturated with alcohol and can no longer store excess uric acid safely in joint fluids, it begins depositing massive, solid clusters of sodium urate crystals into the surrounding soft tissues. These crystals form hard, painless, chalky white nodules directly beneath the skin, most commonly on the knuckles, elbows, and the outer rims of the ears. Over time, these tophi can erode directly through the skin, leaking a thick, paste-like white substance. Ugh. 85. Palmar erythema, or liver palms. Your hands can reveal that your liver is actively dying long before you ever develop jaundice or feel physically ill. This clinical sign is known as palmar erythema or liver palms. It presents as a vivid, deep and mottled red coloration localized entirely to the outer edges of your palms, specifically the thenar and hypothenar eminences. This redness is caused by the localized dilation of the smallest microvascular blood vessels in your hand. It occurs because a failing cirrhotic liver can no longer clear circulating estrogen from the blood, and elevated estrogen levels systematically widen these delicate capillaries. 86. Alcoholic ketoacidosis versus diabetic ketoacidosis. We touched on alcoholic ketoacidosis a moment ago, but there is an important distinction to make. If an unconscious patient is rushed into an emergency room in a state of deep ketoacidosis, an inexperienced doctor can easily accidentally kill them if they mistake alcoholic ketoacidosis for diabetic ketoacidosis. Both conditions involve a dangerous, highly acidic buildup of ketones in the bloodstream. However, in diabetic ketoacidosis, the patient's blood sugar is astronomically high. In alcoholic ketoacidosis, brought on by essentially starvation during a bender, blood sugar is often completely normal or dangerously low. So if a doctor administers large doses of insulin without high-density glucose, they can trigger immediate, fatal hypoglycemia, making a precise diagnostic panel a matter of life or death for alcoholics. 88. The drunkometer. Before the invention of the modern digital breathalyzer, police officers in the 1930s utilized a strange, elaborate and highly theatrical laboratory apparatus on the side of the road known as the drunkometer. Invented by Dr. Roller Hager in 1938, a suspected drunk driver was forced to blow into a large rubber balloon. The captured breath was then slowly pumped through a complex glass chemical solution of acidified potassium permanganate. If alcohol vapor was present in the breath, the purple solution would change color to a dull brown. The officer would then calculate the suspect's exact BAC using a complex mathematical conversion chart. 90. ALDH2 deficiency or Asian flush. For over a third of East Asian populations, a single beer triggers an immediate aggressive genetic defensive response known as an ALDH2 deficiency or the Asian flush. This is a distinct point mutation in the gene responsible for encoding the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase enzyme. While their bodies can convert alcohol into highly toxic acetaldehyde, they lack the functional enzyme tool required to break that acetaldehyde down into harmless acetate. Drinking alcohol results in an immediate toxic accumulation of acetaldehyde, causing severe facial flushing, intense nausea, headaches, and tachycardia, acting as a natural evolutionary deterrent against alcoholism, but drastically multiplying their risk of esophageal cancer if they drink through it. 91. The pink cloud crash. We've talked about the pink cloud already. Now, what happens afterwards? The single highest statistical relapse zone in early recovery occurs on the exact day that the euphoric pink cloud phase vanishes. Around month 2 or 3 of sobriety for most people, the brain's temporary celebratory surge of natural dopamine and endorphins finally stabilizes and drops back down to a baseline level. The initial excitement of getting sober wears off, and the reality of everyday life, stress, and unhealed problems returns. This sudden chemical and emotional drop catches the individual completely off guard. They slide into a deep situational depression, and their own brain convinces them that sobriety is a failure, driving them back to relapse. 92. Hypomagnesemia-induced seizures. Alcohol withdrawal seizures are widely understood to be caused by the sudden removal of alcohol from the brain, but at a deeper biochemical level, they are frequently triggered because your kidneys accidentally flushed out all of your magnesium. Alcohol acts as a potent short-term diuretic that specifically targets the renal tubules of the kidneys, forcing them to rapidly excrete magnesium. Chronic alcoholics suffer from a state of hypomagnesemia. Magnesium acts as a natural blocker for NMDA receptors in the brain. Without it, brain cells become wildly unstable, drastically lowering the seizure threshold and triggering the onset of grand mal seizures during detox. 93. The beer ticket system. In the 19th century, during the height of the Industrial Revolution, several mining and manufacturing companies in Europe and America utilized alcohol as a form of literal corporate slavery. To maximize their control over an uneducated labor force, companies implemented the beer ticket system. Workers were not paid entirely in legal tender, that is to say, money. Instead, a significant portion of their daily wages was issued in corporate vouchers or beer tickets that could only be redeemed at saloons owned directly by the factory bosses. This trapped the working class in a closed, dystopian loop of continuous intoxication, financial debt, and absolute structural dependence on their employer. 94. Alcohol-induced sleep apnea. A person who has never snored a single day in their life can completely stop breathing dozens of times a night after heavy drinking, a condition known as alcohol-induced sleep apnea. Alcohol acts as a powerful central muscle relaxant. When you pass out intoxicated, it deeply relaxes the skeletal muscles of the upper airway, specifically the genioglossus muscle of the tongue. The airway completely collapses inward under negative pressure when you attempt to breathe. This triggers severe, prolonged blockages, dropping blood oxygen saturation to dangerous levels and putting an immense acute structural strain on the right ventricle of your heart. 96. The Keeley Cure. In the late 19th century, a massive commercial franchise swept across America claiming to possess a definitive scientific cure for addiction, the Keeley Institutes. Founded by Dr. Leslie Keeley, the clinics operated under the slogan, "Liquorism is a disease," and claimed a 95% cure rate using a highly secret injection known as the double chloride of gold. Thousands of wealthy alcoholics flocked to the centres. Independent laboratory testing later revealed that the secret formula contained absolutely no gold, but was instead a highly dangerous, addictive cocktail of strychnine, pure alcohol, apomorphine and raw coca leaf extract. And there we have it. The Alcoholism Iceberg explained. If you've made it this far, first off, thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe. So, what did I miss in this list? If you have any suggestions about what might fit into a future Alcoholism Iceberg video, please do leave it in the comments. Again, thank you for watching, and as always, good luck out there.